Only 2 weeks remaining until Selection Sunday and the reveal of the 2024 men's NCAA tournament bracket. And the closer we get to March Madness, the more excited I get as a content creator. I cannot wait to do the bracket video again this year, and it is the one video that I look forward to the most every single year. And if there was just one video that I would really want everyone to watch out of every video, it would be the bracket video, because it's something I look forward to. I get very excited about March Madness. It's the greatest 3 weeks in all of sports. For the time being, we still have 2 more weeks. We still have about a week left of regular season play. We have some of the smaller conferences starting their conference tournaments next week. And we have conference tournament week before we get to Selection Sunday. But I do have a practice bracket today. But before we get to that, I want to discuss the bubble a little bit. And I like to get my insights from Joe Lunardi, because I admire and respect his track record. His last 4 buys are FAU, Nevada, Wake Forest, and Virginia. Last 4 in, according to Joe Lunardi: New Mexico, Gonzaga, Seton Hall, and Providence. His first 4 out: Villanova, Utah, Colorado, St. John's. His next 4 out: Texas A&M, Iowa, Ole Miss, and Kansas State. I do think that FAU, even though this hasn't been the season that they were anticipating, as there was talks that they could contend to be a top 4 seed in the preseason, as they had everybody coming back from the Final Four team last season. But I do think if FAU can get their act together, I think they could make a run to the Final Four again. Virginia, I do feel like they are properly seeded in this bracket, as well as Wake Forest. Wake Forest win over Duke last week. I do think that it puts them safely in for now. And unless they go on a major losing streak to end the season, I think there is no way Wake Forest misses the tournament. Gonzaga, I never really thought that we'd be talking about Gonzaga being on the bubble, but they have a couple of opportunities to pick up some quad 1 wins and to go on a run in their conference tournament. I do think Gonzaga, they've done enough, I feel like, to at the very least be one of the last 4 in. And I would not be surprised if the tournament committee actually has Gonzaga as a 10 seed right now. Villanova picked up a marquee win over Providence today. I'm recording this Saturday afternoon at about 5:30 Eastern Time. Villanova right now should be in the tournament. Providence is out. Utah, Colorado, St. John's, if they can go on a run in their conference tournaments, then they could get a spot in as well. Texas A&M on the next 4 outline. I know that they have the bad losses, and right now they're on a 4-game losing streak as I'm recording this, but they have some fairly strong wins this season. But the problem is they have the bad losses, plus they don't have enough of the strong wins, as they had some opportunities to pick up strong wins earlier in the season, but they could not capitalize, as they lost to FAU, they lost to Houston, they lost to Memphis, who has been in and out of the bubble discussion in the last couple of weeks. They have a loss to Virginia, who is in the bubble conversation. But they do have wins over Iowa State and Kentucky, and a win against Florida, a win against Tennessee. But they just don't have enough of the strong wins. They had an opportunity against South Carolina the other night, but they couldn't get it done. But I do think if A&M, if they go on a run in the SEC tournament, I think it's possible they could get in that large bid. We saw the last 2 seasons where A&M made it to the final in the SEC conference tournament, but they couldn't finish the deal. I think with what they've done this season, if they can just take care of business in these final handful of games in the regular season and then go on a run in the SEC tournament, I think they could get in. Kansas State, it's been a really disappointing season for Kansas State. After making a run to the Elite Eight last season, a couple of plays away from going to the Final Four, and now they're sitting on the outside looking in right now. But I do think it's possible that if Kansas State can go on a run themselves in the Big 12 conference tournament, I feel like they could find their way in, as they do have a win over Villanova earlier in the season, which that is very helpful. Plus, they have a win over Baylor. They have a win over Kansas. They have a win over BYU. But they have some opportunities coming up in their last few games. Cincinnati, a team that's been in and out of the bubble conversation in recent weeks. Kansas on the road. As Kansas, they do look vulnerable right now. And Iowa State to wrap up the season. And if they can go on a run in the Big 12 tournament, Kansas State, they can get in. As these final couple of weeks leading up to Selection Sunday, the bubble race is going to get more and more intense. And let's conclude with the practice bracket. Now, this is Joe Lunardi's latest bracket that I'm filling out. The 1 seeds are Purdue, UConn, Houston, and Arizona. I'm going to start in Purdue's region. Purdue versus the winner of the play game between Eastern Kentucky and Norfolk State. Even though Purdue lost to a 16 last season, I think Purdue moves on. Oklahoma, Colorado State in the 8-9. I like the Sooners. Clemson and Richmond. Now, this feels very tempting to go with the 12 over the 5, but I'm going with the 5 in Clemson. Auburn and Louisiana Tech. I'm going with Auburn to advance. South Carolina versus the winner of the playing game between Gonzaga and Providence. I think if this was the matchup, I think no matter who won this matchup, I think they would win against South Carolina. So I have Gonzaga winning against Providence and then South Carolina to move on. Kansas and Cornell. I have Kansas. Boise State and Wake Forest. I have Wake Forest. Marquette and Oakland. I have Marquette. Moving on to Arizona's region. Arizona versus the winner of Little Rock and Grambling State. I'm going with Arizona. Northwestern TCU. I'm going TCU. BYU and Grand Canyon. I'm going with the upsetter. I'm going with the 12 over the 5 in Grand Canyon. San Diego State and UC Irvine. I'm going San Diego State. Wisconsin and the winner of the playing game between New Mexico and Seton Hall. And I think the winner of the playing game advances. I have Seton Hall over New Mexico and then Wisconsin. As Wisconsin, they look like a vulnerable team to me. Alabama and Akron. I'm going with Alabama. Utah State and Virginia. I'm going with Utah State. Iowa State and Eastern Washington. I'm going with Iowa State. On to UConn's region. UConn and Merrimack. I'm going UConn. Which, by the way, for the record, I really want to see Merrimack in the tournament this season after they couldn't last season due to ineligibility. Texas and Michigan State. I'm going with Michigan State, which that would be, in my opinion, the best 8-9 matchup if this was the actual bracket. I'm going Michigan State there. Washington State and Appalachian State. I'm going Washington State. Kentucky and Vermont. I'm going with Kentucky. St. Mary's and Indiana State. I'm going Indiana State. Baylor and High Point. I'm going with Baylor. Florida and Florida Atlantic. I'm going FAU. North Carolina and Colgate. I'm going North Carolina. Houston and South Dakota State for Houston's region. I'm going with Houston. Mississippi State and Nebraska. Nebraska, the last major conference team to not have a tournament victory, but I think they get one here. I'm going with Nebraska. Illinois and McNeese State. I'm going McNeese State. with that 12-5 upset. Duke and Samford, I'm going with Duke. Dayton, South Florida, I'm going with Dayton. Creighton and Charleston, I'm going with Creighton. Texas Tech, Nevada, I'm going Nevada. Tennessee and Fairfield, I'm going Tennessee. On to the round of 32. I'm going to speed this up. Purdue, Oklahoma, I'm going with Purdue. Clemson, Auburn, Gonzaga, Kansas. Wake Forest, Marquette. Both Marquette, but that upset right there between Wake Forest and Marquette, it just feels very tempting to go with. I'm going to go with Marquette. Arizona, TCU, I'm going with Arizona. Though I was very close to picking TCU to move on. Grand Canyon, San Diego State, going with Grand Canyon. Seton Hall, Alabama. Utah State, Iowa State. UConn and Michigan State. I'm going with the upset. I know UConn is one of the more dominant teams in college basketball, maybe the most dominant team in college basketball, according to some, but I think Michigan State pulls off the upset. Move on. Washington State, Kentucky, going Washington State. Indiana State and Baylor. I think Indiana State pulls off the upset, advances to the Sweet 16. FAU, North Carolina, going with FAU to pull off the upset. Houston, Nebraska, Houston. McNeese State, Duke. Dayton and Creighton, I'm going with Creighton. Nevada, Tennessee, I'm going Tennessee. On to the Sweet 16. Purdue and Auburn. I'm going with Auburn to pull off upset, advance to the Elite Eight. Kansas, Marquette. We saw these two face off early in the season in November, and Marquette, they came out on top, but I think Kansas, they get their redemption. Kansas moving on to the Elite Eight. Arizona, Grand Canyon, I think the Cinderella story ends here. I have Arizona moving on. Alabama, Iowa State, Alabama, and we will get an Elite Eight match between these two, which we were robbed of last season, with Arizona losing early, Alabama losing early as the number one overall seed. Michigan State, Washington State. I have the Cougars of Washington State pulling off the upset, advancing to the Elite Eight, because I think this Washington State team is for real. Indiana State and FAU. I think FAU advances to the Elite Eight. I just think that experience from last year is going to pay dividends. Houston and Duke. I have Houston. Creighton and Tennessee. I have Tennessee. On to the Elite Eight. Auburn and Kansas advance to the Final Four. I have Kansas. Arizona, Alabama. I have Arizona. Washington State and FAU. Once again, I think the experience pays dividends. I have FAU. Houston and Tennessee. I have Tennessee advancing to the Final Four. And in the Final Four, advancing to championship night, Kansas and Arizona. I have the Jayhawks and FAU and Tennessee. A rematch from the Sweet 16 last season. I think Tennessee gets their redemption and advances to the championship. And for the championship game, Kansas and Tennessee winning it all in this practice bracket. I have the Kansas Jayhawks. And I know Kansas looks like a very vulnerable team right now. I get that they have not had a good week, losing to BYU and Baylor in the ways that they lost. But when push comes to shove, I do think that this will come down to coaching. I trust Bill Self's coaching ability in this tournament. And I just think with this bracket, I just think that Kansas has a very favorable path to the championship. And that will do it for my Bracketology update. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, wonderful day, and enjoy the college basketball.